Dyslexia is a language-based disorder, and it refers to a cluster of difficulties, particularly with spelling, with reading, writing, and sometimes with speaking. It's a lifelong challenge, and it will have different impacts at different times in a child's life. Now, dyslexia is in no way related to or stemming from a lack of intelligence. People with severe dyslexia can be brilliant. Although it is a neurological condition, dyslexia is not linked to intelligence. The effects of dyslexia vary from person to person, and really the only shared trait amongst these people with dyslexia is that they read at a level lower than typical people for their age. Now, between 15 and 20% of the population will have dyslexia, an impairment in reading. It has nothing to do with poor educational experiences, nothing to do with bad teaching. This does not cause dyslexia or specific learning disorder. Language difficulties caused by being a non-native speaker will not cause a specific learning disorder. Low social economic status does not directly contribute to a specific learning disorder. Specific learning disorders do tend to run in families, and so it's not unusual to discover that people with learning disabilities come from families in which other family members have reported similar difficulties. Now, dyslexia is related to the susceptibility of some genes to develop differently during fetal development, and these can be gene mutations, and these are the biological condition of dyslexia. It is a gene-based disorder. The continuing research into brain physiology and the connections to dyslexia is providing more answers to our understanding of what dyslexia is and how we diagnose it and how that relates to language and to reading, and also to understand what remediation works. What can we do with these children to help them with their dyslexia? So learning to read is different from learning to speak. No one is born knowing how to read. We do have to learn how to do it. When you read, your brain has to do a lot of things all at once. It has to connect those letters with sounds and put those sounds together in the right order. Then it has to help you put letters, words, paragraphs together in ways that let you read them quickly and understand what they mean. It also has to connect words and sentences with other kinds of knowledge. So when you see CAT on a piece of paper, your brain doesn't just have to read the words, it also has to make those connections that cat means a furry four-legged animal and that a cat may meow. So if we look at the different brain regions that are involved with a dyslexic brain compared with a non-dyslexic brain, if we look at the green area here, the occipital temporal area, we have to be able to process the information that comes in through our eyes, which is at the front of our brain here where my mouse is. And this information has to be processed to our occipital lobe, and this is the part of our brain that deciphers what we see. So for people, when they see a word, they read it several times, neurotypical individuals will make a neural model of it, and that includes the spelling, the pronunciation and the meaning of the word. With a dyslexic brain, we're just not seeing those connections and those activations as you would in a neurotypical child. We can also see that there's not getting activated that purple area here, this parieto-temporal area. And this is usually where children learn to read. That novice reader uses this area combined with Broca's area to slowly analyse words. Now, Broca's area is all about the production of language. And actually there's another area on the left-hand side of our brain too, because the left-hand side of our brain is to do with language, is our Wernicke's area, which is to do with understanding language. And if you can see in the dyslexic brain, the Broca's area, this production of language, this articulation usually helps to connect sounds to letters. It is so much bigger in children with dyslexia because they are having to use it to compensate for the other areas of the brain that are not being activated. And this can also, with children who have dyslexia, the working memory part of our short-term memory, which are concerned with that immediate conscious perception of what we hear and what we see. It's about connecting and manipulating that information of what we see and what we hear. And in children with dyslexia, we know that our working memory it doesn't work as well as neurotypical, and the processing speed of children with dyslexia is problematic. And this isn't a learning or attention issue. Processing speed is the pace at which you take in that information, you make sense of that information, and you begin to respond to it. So this information can be visual, such as letters and numbers, but it can also be auditory information coming in from our spoken language. So children who are dyslexic generally have a slower processing speed, and that is nothing to do with how smart you are. Gifted children can have slow processing speeds. It's just a matter of how fast you take in and use that information. So it takes children to struggle with processing speed a lot longer than other children to perform tasks both related to school, and you will see it in their daily lives as well. So for example, when a child with slow processing speed sees the letters that make up the word, for example, house, you may not immediately know what it says. She has to figure out the strategy to use to understand the meaning of those groups of letters in front of her. It's not that she can't read it, it's just that process, that quick, that automatic connection that other children will make, it just takes her longer and requires an awful lot more effort. So some of the things you might have noticed with your child with dyslexia: the initial difficulty learning to read. Despite having an absolute normal intelligence and receiving proper teaching and parental support, these children are still having difficulties learning to read. You might have noticed that actually when they were younger, that they're crawling, they're walking, and learning to ride a bike took a little bit longer than their siblings. Sometimes speech is slightly slower to develop, and children with dyslexia sometimes mispronounce their words. They often find rhyming extremely challenging, and also sometimes they can't distinguish between different word sounds, particularly when you start looking at the phonics of learning to read. They just can't distinguish those sounds. They're also slow at learning sets of data. So they might take longer to learn the alphabet and the sequence of the alphabet and how the alphabet is pronounced. They also might have problems remembering the days of the week, the months of the year, the colours of the rainbow, and a lot of children have problems remembering their times tables. They might remember it one day and then they might forget it the next day. And this is all part of dyslexia and things that you might pick up on and you might notice at home. Some children will have coordination difficulties. A lot of children with dyslexia appear a little bit clumsier than their peers, and if they are really clumsy and have coordination issues in particular, this could be linked to dyspraxia, or what we call developmental coordination disorder. A lot of children with dyslexia will mix up their left and their right. They get very confused with which is which, and this can continue on into adulthood. Some children will reverse their letters and their numbers without realising what they've done, and a lot of children will have issues with spelling. They might not follow a pattern of progression seen in other children. They may learn how to spell a word one day and completely forget how to spell it the next day. There's no consistency of their spelling as well. They might spell favourite one way one day and favourite another way another day. Some of them will have speech problems. If words have more than 2 syllables, that phonological processing becomes a lot more challenging. So, for example, the word unfortunately, a person with dyslexia may be able to process the sounds un and li, but not the others in between. And their concentration span. Children with dyslexia commonly find it incredibly hard to concentrate, not because they've got ADHD, but because they are mentally overloaded with a lot of that cognitive overload, the amount of effort they are putting into whatever they are trying to read. Although a high number of children with ADHD also will have dyslexia. And then lastly you will notice that children with dyslexia have problems with sequencing. When they are creating stories or when they are planning for the future, you might see that sometimes the way in which their progression of a story just seems a little bit illogical or a little bit unconnected. And then there is some research that suggests that children with dyslexia have more likely a propensity to things like hay fever, asthma and eczema than other children do. One thing we know for certain, though, about dyslexia is that this is one area of difficulty in a sea of strengths. People with dyslexia are often incredibly creative and typically develop some very clever skills to help them figure out words and sentences that give them trouble at first. Dyslexics often think in unexpected ways to solve problems and tackle a challenge. People with dyslexia can be amazingly creative and they often see things in 3D and make wonderful architects. So having trouble with reading does not mean that you'll have trouble at everything. In fact, most children with dyslexia are incredibly good at a lot of things. And I've just put here famous dyslexics: Albert Einstein, Alexander Graham Bell, Steven Spielberg, Michael Faraday, Magic Johnson and Nikola Tesla. You've now started this journey and we at Child are here to support you in any which way that we can. If you've got any questions after watching this video, please do email us at Child and contact us for more information.